Let's Talk. This is a periodic, one might say sporadic, lecture series that we have had here at church over the last few years. We'll do a couple back-to-back and then go a while before we have our next one. And this afternoon's topic is Let's Talk About Parenting. In the past, we've done seminars on anxiety and depression, discipleship, retirement, and things like that. And we're in for a treat this afternoon, having you speak, Amanda, and having you speak as well. So Amanda is going to start us off first. And Amanda, you started attending Faith Presbyterian maybe a year and a half ago, something like that?
Sounds good, yeah.
Year and a half ago, 2 years ago, something like that?
Sure, yep.
And Amanda serves with the ESL ministry, I think among others. Amanda is a licensed professional counselor and an associate professor of counseling at the University of Georgia. Her area of specialization is in addiction, counseling folks who are struggling with that. She's the author of a clinical reference book titled A Clinical Guide to Treating Behavioral Addictions, and is the co-author of a textbook titled Addiction Counseling, A Practical Approach. Dr. Giordano works to advance the counseling field with rigorous research and has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. In 2024, she was awarded the Gary Waltz Trailblazer Award from the American Counseling Association in recognition of her work with behavioral addictions. Dr. Giordano maintains a blog called Understanding Addiction for Psychology Today and has been a guest on several podcasts. So very happy to have you here. We welcome you.
Yes, I'm very excited. All right, folks, I am so excited about today, and we have about 50 minutes each to present. So I have more content than what we're going to get to, which is why if you want to use your camera on your phone for this QR code, I just want to take a second to brag that I just learned how to make these. Yes, a student taught me, but that's all right. I am learning. So if you want to use that QR code, you will have access to all the slides because there's quite a few, and we likely won't get to all of it today. But if you have specific questions, I'm really passionate about this topic. I am very dedicated to getting this information out to parents who actually need it. So feel free to email me. It's amanda.giordano@uga.edu, or you can find me at church if you have specific questions that you want to ask. Has everyone got it to the QR code? Okay, great. So you already heard enough about me, but I did want to highlight one thing, that I do not have children myself, but I am an overly involved aunt. So I have two sisters, and they both have kids, and I am very involved in their lives, whether they really wanted that or not. And if you can imagine, my sisters have to put up with this knowledge that I have about development and screens and digital media, and I'm sure sometimes they're just like, okay, we've got it from here, but I always have information for them. So that's some of how I've learned about how digital media is such an important part of today's society, and it's impacting youth in a variety of ways that I feel very passionate about making sure parents are informed. So we're just going to dive right in, and we're going to first start talking about a digital diet. So I do this presentation quite a bit, and I always have parents ask, just tell me, how much screen time is okay? I need a number, and I can stick to that number. Unfortunately, that's not as simple a question to answer because there's lots of different types of digital media. So we have to think about what's the type of digital media that they're using, how long are they using it before taking a break, are they using it with others or by themselves? So I was able to interview a medical doctor for my book, and he was talking about how he likes to tell parents, think of digital media like a diet. So if you have that in mind, how can we make sure our kids are consuming a healthy digital diet? So just taking a look at these pictures, which would a child choose to eat if it was just up to the child? Right, so we've got some candy over here. It doesn't matter what everything else is. If they see the candy, they're going for the candy. Just like sweets, we can think about digital media use as very rewarding. It's very reinforcing to youth, and if it was up to them, they would probably choose to be on screens all day long. So just like we help them learn how to eat nutritious diets, we need to help our kids learn how to limit digital media use. And we don't just leave it up to them because they might not make the best choices when it comes to foods to eat as well as time on digital media. So another question for you. Which would a child choose to play with? Look at all these awesome toys. But then there's the phone, right? And all of a sudden, all these awesome toys don't matter as much. Why do you think kids are so drawn to a smartphone? Yes, it's stimulating, it moves, they get really good at it really fast. I have a niece who's 3, and she can get to my videos faster than I can. She's like, and then watching a video of herself, mostly. So there are a lot of reasons why digital media is so enticing to kids. And again, left to their own devices, they would choose to play with the very stimulating, colorful, visually appealing sights and sounds smartphone more so than all other toys. Now, Michael Mins, a clinical psychologist, had this to say about children and phones. Babies are attracted to the bright colors and lights of smartphones. Our phones are extremely stimulating and, in a sense, unnatural. That is to say, the lights and images that come from our phones are unlike anything a child might see in their natural environment. As such, our brains are not designed to engage with this level of stimulation, which is one reason why it is so easy for people, adults and kids alike, to get addicted to them. So what I would like to say here, and again, I'm not trying to vilify technology or digital media, but we need to be informed that when we are looking at a child's development, this is a very powerful stimulus to introduce a child to. The one term I want you to remember from today, when I learned about this, it really changed the way I thought about technology. So technology has been referred to as a supernormal stimulus. So what this term means is a supernormal stimulus is an artificial exaggeration of some natural instinct. So you take a natural instinct, you exaggerate it, you create some imitation artificial version. And what's so powerful about a supernormal stimulus is it can become more rewarding and more reinforcing than the natural instinct it was based on. So I won't give you the whole backstory, but this term came out of some animal studies in the 50s and 60s. And what they did is they created fake birds' eggs that were larger and more colorful than a natural bird's eggs. And the mother birds chose to sit on and protect the fake eggs that were bigger and more colorful than her own eggs. And so it's this idea that if something is exaggerated and it looks more enhanced, it might actually have a stronger pull than the natural instinct. So how does that apply to technology? Well, think about some of the supernormal stimuli in today's world. I always like to start with food, because I think it's one we can all wrap our brains around. So let's take the sweetness of a strawberry. It is naturally sweet because we need the calories that come from strawberries. If you think back to like hunter-gatherer times, then we needed calories and energy that comes from food that has sugar and that energy. But now compare the sweetness of the strawberry to candy. Let's just say a pixie stick, because I did Halloween with my nieces and nephews, and people still give those out. That is just sugar in a tube. I don't know why we're still giving that out. But so my nieces and nephews were like, this is the greatest thing ever. But once they have the pixie stick, how much do they want the strawberry? Right? The strawberry can't compete with this concentrated, refined sugar that we find in candy, in desserts. Natural food really can't compete with this ultra-processed food that we have in our society today. And that's why when you have kids and you're like, I'm gonna have them eating all fruits and vegetables and like salmon and all the good things, and then they go to that first birthday party where they have icing. And then they come home and do they want all the fruits and vegetables and healthy food? They just want more icing because they have been introduced to this supernormal stimulus, an artificial exaggeration of a natural instinct. Now, pornography has also been called a supernormal stimulus. Remember, the definition is an artificial exaggeration of a natural instinct. So natural instinct like sexual desire or libido, when you look at pornography, it's exaggerated in a lot of ways, from the actors themselves to the videos and the images, but it's also available 24/7, which is different from an offline romantic partner. And so some people come to prefer pornography over an offline romantic partner. Gaming is another example of a supernormal stimulus. There are lulls in our day. There are times when we are bored and we have to manage boredom and handle that emotion of, I don't really have anything to do. You could be bored right now. I hope you're not, but you might be. But we learn to manage it. In games, in online games, there is always something going on. It is constantly stimulating. There's always a task to complete, someone to talk to, something to see, something new. And so kids can start to prefer the online world compared to the offline world because it is this super normal stimulus, this artificial exaggeration of the offline world. You get the point now, but social media has also been called a supernormal stimulus. Talking on social media with beautification filters where your face is completely symmetric and you don't have any blemishes or problems, that can become more enticing than talking to someone off social media where you have to show your imperfections. So what I want you to remember here is the essence of the supernormal stimulus is that the exaggerated imitation exerts a stronger pull than the real thing. And so when we talk about giving children and youth and adolescents access to digital media that's full of these supernormal stimuli, we have to keep that in mind, that it's actually such a powerful draw, a powerful pull for the kids and adolescents to stay on their devices. And that's actually intentional when we start looking at how technology and digital media is made. Okay, so just a little bit of brain development of children. How many of you have kids that are 0 through 10? Okay, and then what about 11 through 18? Okay, fantastic. I have slides for both of you. So let's start with the brain development of children. When you look at how our human brain develops, it is developing rapidly during that first year of life. So the first year of life, you may have heard that kids are little sponges. They're just taking in all of this data from the outside world. The brain of a toddler is twice as active as the brain of an adult. And part of this development, part of learning, is experience dependent, which means these kids have to have experiences in order for their brains to develop, in order for them to learn and make these neural connections. So the brain's development is in part an experience-dependent process in which experience activates certain pathways in the brain, strengthening existing connections and creating new ones. So kids have to be exposed to sound. They need to be exposed to sight. They need to be exposed to touch and feel in order for their brains to develop the way that it should. You may have heard of critical periods back in your biology days. These are just windows of time when the brain is very sensitive to specific experiences. So we want to make sure kids have diverse, enriching experiences, especially in the first few years of life, in order for their brains to develop, for them to learn, for them to create the neural connections that are necessary. So the first few years of life are when the critical periods are most open. Now, that's not to say that they ever fully close, but it's easier for learning to occur during these critical periods. So how many of you know a second language? How many of you learned that second language before you turned 7? Okay, how many of you tried to learn a new language in college? How challenging was that to try and learn a new language in college? That's actually not the best time to learn a new language. We know that the brain and the critical periods around language are most open 0 to 7 up to maybe 10 years old. And so if you are going to learn a second language, that's the time to do it. Not saying you can't when you're older, but it's harder. So this is why diverse experiences in enriching environments is so important for children, so that their neural connections can be made, they can learn, they can develop the way that they need to. So, what is not happening in this picture? Yes, thank you. Diverse, enriching experiences, right? It's not necessarily that what they're looking at on the screen is bad. That's what sometimes I have parents say, but they watch Christian things, they watch educational things. I have them, playing games that are helping them with their cognition. It's not that what they're doing on the screen is necessarily bad, it's what they're not doing with the time that they're on screens. That they may actually develop something like hand-eye coordination if they're playing a little game, or memorizing songs if they're watching little videos. That part of their brain might be developing very nicely, but other parts of the brain aren't getting a chance to develop because they're not having those diverse, enriching experiences. So, children learn through experiences, and they need these diverse experiences to build their neural networks. Also, just to figure out what they're interested in, to develop some skills and some competence, and that helps develop self-efficacy. So it really impacts a lot of other parts of kids' personalities and their development as they try new things, realize, hey, I'm pretty good at that, or I'm really interested in that. That's great for kids. So a child's day should include the following things: physical activity, some sort of movement, some sort of play, imaginative and creative play. So when I was growing up, we had paper dolls. Did any of you ever play with paper dolls? With like those tabs that would break as soon as you would get the dress off? But that's all you had. This was the stimulus that you had. And so we would make up storylines. My sisters and I would play together, and you're using your imagination to come up with the story. That's imaginative play and creative play, which we know is very important for kids. Also, social interactions with peers and also with adults. Kids learn a lot. Their brains learn a lot by communicating with others. They kind of learn the rules of social communication, like I need to wait for someone to stop talking before I start talking. All of those things happen through experience. Outdoor experiences, in nature, in the sun, looking at the world around them. And then also 10 to 14 hours of sleep, dependent upon the child's age. So with all that in mind, when all those things are happening, how much time is left for devices? I like this scholar who said, offer digital media to children alongside a balance of other developmentally appropriate activities, such as these. So the recommendation from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry is 1 hour of screen time per weekday for kids 2 to 5 years old, and it's recommended that that digital media time, that screen time, occurs with others. So are they watching videos with someone? Are they playing a game with a parent so they're talking about what's happening? That is the recommendation. Now, raise your hand again if you are parenting an adolescent right now. All right, I like it. I like the enthusiasm in the hand raise. So the adolescent brain, why do they need our help? We know that brain maturation, so that's just kind of a fancy word that's talking about how the brain develops with a fatty sheath called myelin. It encompasses or it encircles the neurons in our brain, which are the specialized nerve cells in our brain. When that myelination happens, that fatty sheath wraps around the neuron, it communicates faster. I used to use some kind of analogy to, like, if you have a wire in your house and you put rubber around it or something, I think it moves insulation. Then I realized I had no idea what I'm talking about, so I stopped using that example. But when our neurons are myelinated, they are communicating faster. And the myelination process, the brain maturation process, starts at the back of the brain and finishes with the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain. Now, do you remember back in your, again, biology, neurobiology days, what is the prefrontal cortex responsible for? Yes. So executive functioning, decision making, coming up with pro and con lists, self-regulation, and inhibitory control. All of that doesn't fully develop until age 25. So whenever I say this, parents are like, oh my gosh, we have so much longer to go. But that is when the brain is fully myelinated and that prefrontal cortex is operating as fast as the other parts of the brain. During adolescence, the middle of the brain is typically myelinated or in the myelination process. That is the part of the brain that is responsible for emotional processing and rewards. So sometimes when you just have that moment and you're like, oh my gosh, my teenager is so dramatic. That's because the emotional part of their brain is the one that's moving faster than that logical, rational part of the brain. So they really do respond with emotions more so than their prefrontal cortex. I really feel like that's why Taylor Swift's albums are doing so well, because we have a lot of kids that are like, I feel what she's saying, because that's the part of the brain that's really working. So what that means is this mid-region of the brain, kind of between our ears, is the limbic region. That is the part responsible for rewards, emotional processing. It's moving faster, it's speaking louder than the prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain that says, wait, what happened the last time I did this? Do I really want to do this again? I don't know. That part of the brain is slower. It's quieter. So I tell my students, it's as if the part of the brain that says, that felt good, let's go do it again, is very loud. And the part of the brain that's like, maybe I should think twice about this and think about the consequences, is really soft during adolescence. That's why they need our help. So as they grow, as they get closer to 25, that inhibitory control, the self-regulation, the executive functioning will catch up. It will become as fast as the other regions of the brain. But during adolescence, it's not there yet. So I actually heard a psychologist say, it's like you have to give your adolescent just a prefrontal cortex lift. Just a little help. So if you can just pause your adolescent long enough to think through the consequences, that can be really helpful because their brain is not doing that naturally. It's a little bit slower to bring in the prefrontal cortex. So a couple of things. Adolescents are more sensitive to rewards. There's more activity going on in that reward pathway, which is in the mid-region of the brain. They're more likely to return to rewards once they experience them. They're novelty seeking. So you've heard of the chemical in our brain, the neurotransmitter called dopamine. It used to be called the pleasure neurotransmitter. Now we know there's a little bit more to it than that. It has more to do with anticipating reward or wanting reward. But more dopamine is released with novel stimuli. So adolescents are looking for novelty. They may be a little bit more on the sensation-seeking side, a little bit more impulsive, because that's how their brains are operating. They have stronger go drive and weaker stop drive during the adolescent years. So there's more risk-taking during adolescence. I mean, think back to your own adolescence. You probably did some things that now you're like, I can't believe I did that. But that was, in the moment, what seemed like a great idea, is let's go do this thing that seems fun. Now, that's not all bad. I don't want to paint adolescents as like, oh, these poor creatures. Adolescents need to desire a little bit of risk-taking to differentiate from their family of origin. We want them to find out who they are and to go try different things and say, you know, no one in my family has ever played an instrument. I'd like to try playing an instrument, or I'd like to play a sport or go to a math club. I played chess, and I loved it, but no one else in my family did. So there are things that we want adolescents to go out and try to do. So it's positive and negative that they engage in more risk-taking behaviors. I'm sure that you have heard that peers matter a lot during adolescence, which they do. Peer groups' influence becomes more important, but what research tells us is that parental influence does not become less important. It's just as important, but now it's competing with peers. So both peers and parental influence really matter for adolescents, which is why we need to be explicit with our hopes for them. We need to be explicit with what we expect from them, with boundaries. I have some parents who will come to my sessions and say, I don't want to talk to them about drugs or cannabis, or I know they're going to use anyway, so I don't want to tell them not to, because then they won't come talk to me when they do. And what we know from the literature is that even if a child is still going to use a substance, it matters that they know that is not what their parents want for them. They might still do it, but it matters to know my dad or my mom did not want me doing this. That adds an extra layer. They need to know for certain. You need to be clear with them about your expectations because it still matters during adolescence. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Okay, great. So, what would a healthy digital diet look like for your child, given the brain development stuff that we talked about? So, depending upon the age of your child, you can actually sit down and come up with a plan. You think about school and homework. Let's just say that's 8 hours a day, even though it might be a little bit more with travel time and things like that. It is recommended that adolescents and children get 1 hour of physical activity per day. So let's factor that in. They need 8 to 12 hours of sleep per night, depending on their age, particularly in adolescence. So that leaves, depending upon how this works out, 3 to 7 hours a day for other things like household chores, socializing with friends offline, engaging in offline hobbies, spiritual practices, reading, and screen time. So, using just math, how much of this do you want dedicated to screen time? That's a conversation for you to have with your child. Help them see this and understand where you're coming up with your limits and your boundaries for screen time. Let them be a part of this conversation and a part of the process. So that's one way you can start thinking about how much screen time is okay. What we don't want to do is fall into a pattern of whenever I don't have something planned, I'll just let them use their screens, because that can very quickly add up to 5-6 hours a day. And remember, we want them engaging in those enriching, diverse experiences to promote self-esteem and brain development. You also have to consider, as a parent, what type of digital media is okay in your household. Not all digital media is created equal, so you can do a lot of things on a smartphone. Everything from gaming, checking social media, watching online videos, texting, messaging, FaceTime, online shopping, sports betting, scrolling blogs, discussion boards, pornography, educational content, the news. So you also need to consider, when you're coming up with your family's technology plan, what is developmentally appropriate for your child? What do you feel comfortable with them doing on social media? What aligns with your family's goals and values? What's healthy and what's safe? So this requires a lot of intentionality on your part, a lot of research to see what do I want them using or engaged in, and what would I rather them not be engaged in. The other question I get a lot is, when can they have a smartphone? Parents struggle with this, right? There's been this campaign that's like wait till 8th, saying don't, give your kid a smartphone until they reach 8th grade. There's all sorts of opinions about when children can get a smartphone. All I would like to remind you is you don't have to give them the full access to everything a smartphone can do at a particular age. You can grow into a smartphone. So, with age and demonstrated maturity, maybe you progress in a manner such as this. So starting with the phone only. They really do make these now. Enough parents have said, I don't want my child having full internet access. And you can get a bark phone. There are phones that, again, just call people. Then maybe you move into phone and texting with demonstrated age and maturity. Then maybe select apps, and they can watch some online videos from sites that you trust. Then at a certain age, maybe you allow some gaming, but you're very informed about the games they are playing. Then maybe you move into social media and messaging apps. And then maybe in college, they have the full functions of a smartphone. This is really unique to you and your child. What's appropriate for a 12-year-old down the street might not be appropriate for your 12-year-old. You need to know, what is their personality like? Why are they using the phone? Am I seeing any negative consequences? So you make decisions based on your unique child. Okay, so I know there's a lot on this slide, but if you are going to develop a technology plan or a contract, this is what's being recommended for families, is let's actually write it down, make a contract, and sign it. So you sign it, child signs it. There's a lot of templates online. So you can actually just type in family technology plan or family technology contract, and you can see templates online. But here are some things that you want to consider and come up with as a family. So identify times of day when technology can and cannot be used. So at mealtime, I loved growing up, and we would all eat dinner together. Even when we were involved in sports, we just waited until everyone was home. We would have dinner, and then my dad would go around the table and say, everyone tell me about your day. So everyone had the spotlight for a little bit of time. There was no devices, no screens. And so do you want that in your household? If so, that means you also wouldn't have a device at the table. So the whole family is agreeing to this contract. What about first thing in the morning, as soon as they wake up, checking social media, or right before bed? So I teach the addictions class at UGA, and I always ask them, how many of you scroll social media before bed? And it's like the whole entire class. I'm like, how many of you know that that is not great for your sleep? They all raise their hand. They know. They know it's not helpful, but they really want to scroll before they go to bed. So let's just put it in a contract. An hour before bed, no devices, no screens. Who has access to each device, and what can they review? So kids, adolescents need to know, what are the limits with privacy? So a lot of parents say, I pay for this device. It is my device. I am letting you use it, child, which means I have access to it. I can check your messages, I can check your browser history. So making that transparent. You don't want to surprise the child later. Another good thing to think about is, where do devices sleep? So all devices may sleep in the parent's room. If you want your device to charge, it needs to happen in parent's room at night. Again, there's a lot of things that kids can access if they have just complete unsupervised use of a device. What's okay to share online and what is not? This is a big thing, and you have slides about sexting and sextortion. There's a lot of things coming out right now about predatory behavior, asking kids and adolescents to share sexually graphic or compromising photos, and then using that to blackmail the child into a variety of things. And so a lot of masquerading happens. So this predatory behavior is an adult masquerading like a child in a game or on social media. So the individuals who succumb to this predatory behavior believe they are talking to another 12-year-old or another 13-year-old, who usually sends them a sexually explicit photo first and then says, now you send me one. As soon as child sends one, then the person reveals themselves and says, I'm gonna send this to your dad's work if you don't send me $500,000. So there's a lot of predatory behavior happening online anytime users can connect. So that can be dating apps, social media, gaming. It is so important for you to talk to your kids beforehand about what they can share online and what's not appropriate to share online. And so I was reading about sextortion not too long ago. The FBI has a lot of information about it for parents, and there's links in here. But they said that they'll even pose as like modeling agencies, saying, oh my gosh, I saw your social media profile, you're so beautiful. Can you send me some photos in dresses? Now how about in a bathing suit? It's very deliberate and intentional what they're doing. And remember, adolescents' brains are not fully matured yet. And so they might not be thinking through all of the consequences. This is why they need us to set them up for success by telling them about the potential risks before they get online. So what's okay to share online? What is your expected behavior of them? So there's a lot of cyberbullying that happens online. And I talk to parents, and they're always concerned about their child being the victim of cyberbullying, which is very fair. But there's also a lot of kids that are doing the bullying. So are you talking to your children about expected online behavior, how to treat others with kindness, words to use and not use, so helping them not bully as well? The big thing I want you to hear me say today is there can be user interaction in a variety of apps and games, and sometimes it can even be hidden. So my sister was downloading an app, I don't remember what it was, for her daughter, but she read through what the app has access to. And it had access to contacts and email and something else that you're like, why would this child's app need all of that access? And it turns out there could be some user interaction, meaning that your child could be talking to someone that you don't know. And so I always ask parents, when would you feel comfortable with your child talking to strangers? And if they're like, well, probably not until they're 13, 14, 15. Okay, so then would you let them do that in a game or on a social media app or in any other type of app that's designed for kids where the users can interact? They can text with each other, they can use voice communication. When are you okay with that? And so it's up to the parent to read about these apps and read about the games to know, is there any user interaction? And if so, is that developmentally appropriate for your child? Who are they allowed to talk to? Is it only those that are known to the parent, or can they talk to people unknown to the parent? There are some games that you can give a link out so child can play with neighbor down the street in a game and you're aware of who they're playing with. There are other apps and games where they can play with anyone else in a virtual space. Okay, use of the phone in school. When is it allowed? When is it not allowed? Keeping phones and devices out of reach while driving. That has become more and more important for teenagers, that you drive with the phone in the back seat or somewhere that you can't reach it. Downloading new apps and games only with parental permission, or can they download their own apps and games? So these, I won't go through every single one, but these are the things that you can think about as a family, come up with family rules, and it might not be forever. It might be for this stage, we're gonna do it this way, and let's see how it goes. With demonstrated age and maturity, we might change some of these rules as we go through this process together. So the last thing I'll end with is that these rules and expectations are for the whole family. So if you are having child sign a contract or adolescent sign a contract, but then you are doing the behavior that you said not to do, that can send a mixed message. So it has to be something that the whole family is in on. The other thing I will mention, just for the sake of time, because we won't get to all of those slides, is talking beforehand about when your child or adolescent should talk to you about what they see online. So we know that access to the internet comes with the risk of seeing graphic material, getting bullied, predatory behavior, strangers reaching out for information, non-suicidal self-injury. I do a lot of research on self-harm videos and posts and pictures online. If they're upset over something that happened online, or if they feel like they're losing control over their online use, encourage them to come talk to you. That, again, is setting the expectation. If you see something disturbing, if you see something you don't understand, it's not your fault for seeing it. Come talk to me about it so we can talk through it. A lot of times what we see with children and adolescents who are exposed to pornography for the first time, a lot of times it's accidental, but they feel this guilt and shame, like I wasn't supposed to see that. So then they don't tell anyone. When if you tell the child in advance, even if you see something you don't understand, like people without their clothes on, come talk to me about it. It's not your fault, but let's talk about it and I can help you understand it, answer any questions that you have. We don't want them harboring what they see online as this scary, dark secret that they just dwell on. That also means you can regularly ask your children and adolescents, so what are you seeing online right now? What are some of the things that you're doing in your gaming or in social media? What kind of things have you come across that you've been thinking about? So you're just opening the lines of communication. Just a couple of suggestions here for parents. You can invest in parental control apps. So once your children get old enough and they're in their adolescent years and they're starting to maybe have more access to the internet, Bark, Life 360, Canopy, Safe Vision, there's quite a few parental control apps that can help block some of the harmful or sexually explicit material. Consider at the beginning linking phones with your child. I have several friends who do this and they say, yes, it is obnoxious that I get all of their texts and I'm just like, oh my gosh, really? But I know what texts are coming in. I know what texts are going out. And at the beginning, that's what these parents want to do, is we're going to see if they're going to use it in the way that we agreed, and they know everything is being mirrored. They know I can see everything that's coming in on their phones. Okay, so have about 10 minutes left, so I want to just highlight a couple of things about different forms of digital media. So social media, lots of things can happen on social media. So along with what we've seen in the news and the literature about it being linked to depression or low self-esteem, particularly among adolescent girls, there's also the risk of exposure to sexual content, pro-eating disorder content, non-suicidal self-injury like cutting, suicidal content, these risky or dangerous challenges that adolescents think if I do this, then my video could go viral and then I could be famous because my prefrontal cortex isn't fully working yet. So they engage in these activities that you're like, what? Oh my gosh, that's on the internet forever. They need our help to think through the consequences of some of these things. Lots of commercialism and influencers that are trying to market products, and then extreme or angering content. So conspiracies, algorithms set up so you only see one side of an issue, which can entrench people more and more in just one point of view instead of considering multiple points of view. Also, did you know the Surgeon General said last year that 13 was too young for social media? I love that this happened because the social media platform folks, they say it's for 13 and up. But looking at all of the data, the Surgeon General said 13 is too young. And if parents can band together and say as a group, we're not going to allow our kids to use social media until 16, 17, or 18, or whatever age they choose, that's a much more effective strategy in making sure your kids don't get exposed to harm early. I loved that he said 16, 17, 18. I mean, that's very different than 13 years old. So keeping that in mind, if they are going to use social media, when? When would be the appropriate time? With social media use comes the risk of cyberbullying. And this is happening at alarming rates. And I think a lot of that is because people are behind a screen. They can be anonymous, they can say and do hurtful things, but also they're usually adolescents that aren't making the decisions they would make if they were 25 or 26 years old. So there's lots of different types of cyberbullying. I won't go through all of them, but I just want to highlight something. That cyberbullying is unique from offline bullying. So cyberbullying can happen anytime and anywhere. So think about bullying. If you're being bullied at school and there is someone at school who's bullying you, when you leave school, you're in a safe space. You're like, I can let my guard down, I can breathe. The bully is not in this setting. I have a little bit of reprieve. That doesn't happen with cyberbullying. It can happen 24 hours a day. Also, you may never know who the perpetrator is. Online or offline bullying, you know who's bullying you. Cyberbullying, you may never know, causing you to question all of the relationships that you have. Rather than just a bunch of kids at school watching this bullying happen, cyberbullying has a very large virtual audience, and it can get larger and larger and larger as the days go on. As a counselor, the thing that I'm very concerned about is, yes, there are going to be kids that bully other kids. But what we hope happens is that when child bullies another child, they see the pain they inflicted on that child. It gives them a chance to have some empathy and have some remorse and say, I'm not going to do this again in the future. That's how people learn to change their behaviors. Cyberbullying, the perpetrator doesn't get to see the outcome that it has on the victim. So they don't have that opportunity to feel remorse, develop empathy, and decide, I'm not going to do it again. So there's a lot to talk to your kids about with regard to cyberbullying. Pornography in your child. We did a study in 2022, my research team and I, and we found that average age of first exposure is 11 and a half years old. So that is 5th and 6th grade, I think. So again, this is what I already sent my sisters a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and they're like, we're not reading this right now. And I'm like, you need to, because the average age is 11 and a half. So we want to give kids a schema or a category in their minds about what they might see before they see it, so that they know what to do. I've heard lots of stories from friends about their kids' first exposure to pornography. And again, a lot of them hide it. A lot of them don't reveal it until much later. And there's a lot of unlearning you have to do when a child views pornography, right? I think we can all agree that pornography is a terrible sex education teacher. We don't want them learning about sexuality through that medium. So we have to have time to help them unlearn what they saw. They're little sponges, but they might come to very inaccurate conclusions about sex. So 56% of US high school students viewed pornography in the past year, and among adolescents, it's been linked to a variety of negative outcomes: sexual aggression, more permissive sexual attitudes, more dominant sexual behaviors, body comparison and self-objectification, developing their scripts of what they think sex is based on what they see in pornography, and then poor academic performance, just that they could become mentally preoccupied with it, and it gets in the way of them doing their academic work as well. So this is, I had so many people ask, so how do you talk to your kids about pornography before they see it? So I developed this little script, and you can phrase it however you want to, but saying something like, there are lots of pictures and videos on the internet, and some are made for kids, and some are made for adults. There may be times when you come across a video that's made for adults, videos of people who don't have clothes on or people doing things you don't understand. If you see a video like this, come and tell me so we can talk about it. It's never your fault if you see these types of videos, so don't be afraid to come tell me or another adult about it. Do you have any questions? So having that conversation before a child sees pornography sets them up for success by saying, okay, this is that thing that Mom or Dad mentioned, and they told me just to come talk to them about it, so I know what to do. I don't have to keep this as a dark secret. I'm gonna go tell them. But you've also opened up the line of communication for questions. Why are those videos out there? What does this mean? And so those are tough conversations to have. I think it's a very difficult time to be a parent. But if children, 56% of adolescents are viewing it, high school students, we need to make sure that we are explaining our expectations around it. And especially for younger kids who see it and again may feel very guilty and a lot of shame, giving them the instruction that they need. So if you see it, turn off the device, come tell me, and let's talk about it. Just a little bit about sexting, because I know you're already like, this is the most depressing talk I have ever been to. A couple more things. Sexting is the transmission of sexually explicit text messages, videos. It can include sharing them with a consenting person, because adolescents who are in a relationship may feel like this is kind of the next stage of the relationship, or it can come from a non-consenting person or to a non-consenting person. What's important for adolescents to realize is that even on Snapchat or things that disappear, anything can be screenshotted, right? You can screenshot anything and keep that photo and then use it in detrimental ways. So some of the things I hear from my school counseling friends is that adolescents are in a relationship, they exchange photos thinking, I am going to be with this person forever. I love them so much and they love me so much and we are going to get married. And then they break up. And then what happens to the hurt or angry person in that dyad who has all of these photos, right? You can put them online, you can share them with friends, you can pass them around school. There's a lot of negative outcomes from sexting that a lot of kids haven't paused long enough to think through with their prefrontal cortex. What could be the negative outcomes? Let's just fantasize that maybe you don't marry this person and they have these photos. What could happen? So again, talking to your child about sexting. Have they heard about this at school? Do their friends engage? So opening those lines of communication. We did a study with 350 American adolescents and found that a quarter had ever been asked by a peer to send a sext, about 15% had sent a sext, and about 24% had received a sext. In the past year, 12% felt pressure to send a sext. So this is happening in schools. We need to have conversations. But again, what I hear is talking to adolescents, talking to kids about not sending sex. But we also need to talk to kids about not asking for sex. We need to say that you don't send them, but you also don't ask for them from someone else. So talking to your children about sexting before they have texting privileges. Letting them know when it's developmentally appropriate that sexting can trigger child pornography laws in a lot of states. The laws have not caught up with technology, and it varies from state to state about whether or not they see that as possession of child pornography. Anything can be saved even after it disappears if they took a screenshot beforehand. Relationships change. Disseminating photos can be an act of retaliation after a breakup. So talk to your child about what to do if someone asks them for a nude photo. What to do if they receive a nude photo they didn't ask for, but someone was trying to get their attention. Revise the narrative that sexting is not the new requirement of romantic relationships. This is not something that everyone is doing and that everyone has to do. Important to teach them not to ask for a sext, and just letting them know. I've found, so I'm a big fan of a counseling technique called motivational interviewing. But basically, if you ask your child, like, what are your goals? What are your goals for high school? What are your goals for college? What do you want to be when you grow up? And then you hold up those goals side by side with sexting and ask, is there any way sexting could be a risk to your goals? They can start to understand that explicit photos on the internet can impact their college experience, their future careers. Okay, I'm gonna make an executive decision. With the 3 minutes I have left, I wanna show you some negative outcomes of gaming. I know gaming is very, very popular among adolescents right now. I continually hear from parents, but my child is the only one not gaming. And so again, it's not, is gaming all good or all bad, but what amount of gaming is appropriate for your child and why? So you're considering all of these things. Sextortion, I already mentioned, but I did want to draw your attention to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a great website about sextortion as well. It has videos that explains it so you can have these conversations with your kids. According to the FBI and Homeland Security, there were 12,600 victims of sextortion between October 2021 and March 2023. So this is impacting a substantial number, and these are just ones that have been reported as well. Yeah.
I'm not an idiot, but can you define what sextortion is?
Yes, you're not an idiot. I should have done that. So it is that predatory behavior where someone targets a minor, masquerades as someone their age, and then asks for a sexually explicit photo. So saying, sexting, just like everyone else is sexting, will you send me a picture? Once they get it, they use it as blackmail for that child. So that's where they could say, I'm gonna send this to your mother or father's work, I'm gonna send it to your school, unless you send me either more sexually explicit materials or money. So there's a lot of different things that they're after when they are engaging in sextortion. The FBI says they have a whole outline of like what to do if you're in this situation. You wanna save all the evidence, but you wanna stop communication. Oftentimes complying with their demands does not stop the sextortion, they just continue with more and more demands. So stop communication, preserve the evidence, but also they've created this free service called Take It Down. So National Center for Missing and Exploited Children can use this service to try and find and remove the sexually explicit photos that might be online of the adolescent or of the child. So again, this is like kind of a worst case scenario. I don't want you to leave here thinking like, oh my gosh, this is gonna definitely happen to my child. I just think it's important for parents to be informed about the potential risks that are out there. And this is one. So I encourage you to check out those two websites, the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The last thing I wanted to say about gaming is, yes, gaming addiction is a thing, and I'm happy to talk to you about that if you have any questions about, wow, is my adolescent or college student losing control over their gaming and continuing despite negative consequences? But even if not addicted, there are risks associated with gaming. One of the big ones being player toxicity. So if you envision this, you have games that are high stakes and competitive environments. Gamers, a lot of whom are adolescents that are masked behind these avatars, so their identity is unknown. They're communicating with each other either by text or voice communication with strangers or with friends. You see how that can become aggressive, that it can become hostile communication. So this toxic communication that we're seeing in games can include threats, bullying, sexual harassment, racist language, foul language, crude language. There was a national survey conducted where 62% of American youth said they experienced harassment in online games. So again, I asked my students, like, how many of you are gamers? About a third raised their hand, and I said, tell me what the communication is like. Has anyone ever said anything that was unpleasant? And they're like, yeah, it's just part of the game. If you mess up, people tell you to end your life. If you would do something wrong, then they start criticizing any aspect of who you are that they can tell from the gaming. So there's this player toxicity can happen as a risk with gaming, even outside of addiction and some of the other negative consequences. So just a little bit about what you can do if your child wants to game. You can use controls and blocks to ensure that your child is not able to voice chat with unknown gamers. You can set those parameters. You can use these parental controls. Teach kids about cyberbullying, what to do if it happens. Also, the predatory behavior like sextortion happens in games as well. They start having side conversations that then can move to texting. And then also teach digital citizenship. So this is a word that's being used in schools quite a bit right now, how to educate children about how to engage in safe, ethical behaviors online, where they have empathy for people online. They are kind to people online. So teaching them how to be good offline citizens as well as good online citizens. Whew, okay, I am 2 minutes over, but we made it. So this QR code is for a Facebook page that I have where I try to keep it updated on behavioral addictions. So if you're interested in that topic at all, you're welcome to follow that. And then my email address, if you have specific questions and want to reach out to me, I would be happy to have that conversation. So thank you all so much.